Institute for Urban Health, the international conference in Marrakesh, and we discovered Amalou, which is normally a mix of almonds and argan oil and argan honey. And we decided to do our own variant using pistachios because they're higher in protein. So I was shelling pistachios this morning. This is the number of pistachios I shelled. That turned out to be 400 milliliters of pistachio powder when ground up in this grinder. And then I put 2 tablespoons of argan honey, which is a very expensive honey made when bees are placed near the argan blossoms from roughly I think he said January through March is when the argan trees will blossom and they bring the bees there. This is 31 euro for 250 milliliters. So incredibly expensive, though nutrient dense honey. It's dark like Schwarzwald honey in Germany. Tree honeys tend to be dark and very nutritious. So I used 2 tablespoons of that, and then I used 3 tablespoons of argan oil. This because of climate change, because of the droughts, because of the metabolic rift where the soils are getting depleted. Floods will happen when there is rain, and then there'll be a drought. The trees are ailing, and so the price has gotten so expensive, 4 or 5 times what it used to be. So this is $80 for 1 liter of this. So we're doing this as research, so we couldn't obviously afford this normally. I used 3 tablespoons of the argan oil, and when I mixed it, it was still too thick, so I added 1 more tablespoon of honey, bringing the honey up to 3 tablespoons, and 1 more of argan oil, making it a total of 4 tablespoons of argan oil. Now, we're going to see if that grinds to the right consistency. We hope that it does. This is going to get very expensive very quickly. But let's grind away here. I can get this thing to sit properly. There we go. And we'll grind it all up. Amalou is traditionally made, as I mentioned, with almonds and then argan oil and honey. It can be other honeys besides argan honey. It's the argan oil that gives it its special properties because the argan oil is very rich in omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, supposed to be good for cholesterol. These are made from roasting the argan seeds and then immediately grinding them in a stone grinder, a hand grinder, and then pressing out the oil and using the cake for cosmetics or for animal feed. And the oil is extracted. We did see a couple of trees that had been planted outside of their natural range. We saw one by the Abu Cooperative in Sidi Fadma along the river on a balcony by their store, 7 years old, that had just begun to produce seed for the first time. It does take about 7 years for that to happen. And we saw one 3-year-old specimen in the Akrish Cemetery Nursery in Akrish, and then a 1-year-old seedling. Whether those will bear fruit is anybody's guess. They believe that the one in Sidi Fatma was bearing fruit because they brought 20 kilos of soil from the Amalou forest down in the south Neswera and brought it up to Sidi Fatma in the High Atlas Mountains near Marrakesh, and it did bear fruit. So there's hard to know. It's difficult. There's a lot of work being done, but not enough on making the argan oil prices come down by getting more argan fruit tree supply. This now looks like it's still very thick, but it certainly has a very good flavor. And I think for cost reasons, we would want to keep that ratio what it is. Otherwise, you'd have to add something to cut it or fill it like sunflower oil or olive oil. But I think, yes, 400 mils, not quite, or maybe even up to a half a liter, 5 mils of pistachio with, as we mentioned, 3 tablespoons of honey and 4 tablespoons of argan oil does make a pretty good Amalou. Try it out. This is what I will be testing until we run out of argan oil. We will continue to use different honeys when we run out of this very expensive honey, but this is the best to be using. We'll experiment with adding sesame in so we can get more of the methionine, which is lacking in the pistachios. We still need a source of lysine if we want to have a complete protein, and for that we might start adding some quinoa. Quinoa and amaranth have a complete protein profile. Pistachios are very good, except they're somewhat lacking somewhat in methionine. They do have some methionine, and they're lacking in lysine. And so to get the lysine, we're going to have to add maybe even chickpeas could go, or some legume. And they do make in the stores they sell in Marrakesh an amalou made with peanuts. Now peanuts are legumes; they're not nuts, and they are high in lysine. So a mix of peanut and pistachio and almond and sesame and argan oil with some olive oil to keep the expense down, and different honeys would probably create a perfect nutrition, with the exception of vitamin C, which we'd have to get from things like cilantro or green pepper. Don't say citrus. Oranges turn out fairly low in vitamin C. Really, green pepper is great, but the one that ChatGPT was suggesting in our conversation this morning was to use rose hips. And we can get rose hip and put that in here, and we'll get our vitamin C, our ascorbic acid that's necessary. And then it could be a complete meal. But what you're seeing today on our return from Morocco is I am going to eat any meat for the next several months. I'm going to be paleo vegan as much as possible and base most of my nutrition on the amalou that we start experimenting with here today. Thanks.